I grew up a daddy's girl. I remember being in elementary school and they had a writing assignment. You know, what's the most important thing to you in your life? And mine was, oh, it's my dad. If it wasn't for my dad, I wouldn't be here. I guess because my mom was absent, he had this like extra importance to me. We lived in a place with my grandparents, so I think that sort of like insulated the reality of the fact that he was an alcoholic and a drug addict. I didn't know that at the time. We were living in the attic of my grandparents' house, so I guess to not have to go down the stairs, he would pee in the gallons. They were milk gallons actually, but instead of taking them downstairs and dumping them out the next morning, he just saved them. Some of them were older than others, like full of chunky pee. Like it had been there that long that it turned. But we ended up getting our own apartment. There wouldn't be hot water. We wouldn't have electricity. He would send me to my aunts and uncles' houses to borrow money. Around the time that I realized that he was an alcoholic, we would go to the liquor store every day after school. We'd go to different liquor stores, you know, to preserve his good image. We'd go to different liquor stores to make sure they didn't know. So eventually I confronted him. In my little girl way, I said, if you are gonna keep drinking, I wanna drink too. I was like, if it's that great, you know, that he's spending all of our rent money, we don't have utilities. Like, so we would go to the liquor store and I would like point to what I wanted or like whisper to him, oh, you know, get me a little. We go home together, drink together. 11 actually. I get drunk with my dad, drinking, watching TV. You just zone out watching TV, pass out. And there was one time that we went to San Francisco. It was me and him and my godfather, and we got a little hotel room, and they had a cooler full of beer, and they kept letting me get more and more beer. I got really drunk and I was having such a great time. I was like falling on the floor and laughing, and then I blacked out. My godfather was gone, and I woke up and I don't have many memories of that, so I wasn't quite sure what had happened. And then I moved away from home when I was 19. I moved to Austin, and then I started having these really, really bad nightmares. Every single night, I would wake up screaming, having these flashbacks of him raping me. I'd heard a lot about false memory syndrome and stuff like that. Like I said, I was such a daddy's girl. I didn't want to believe that about him, even though there were a lot of feelings that preceded that. He would just gaze at me. There was this feeling of possessiveness. He would sometimes get really flustered around me, like a little boy on a date or something. He would kind of stiffen up when I would hug him, and it was almost like he was afraid to touch me. He had no relationships with women while I was growing up. We never saw him with women. My mom left my dad for another guy. She was cheating on him. They split up before I have any sort of memory. But as soon as my mom left him, he immediately gained a lot of weight. Like you can see in the baby pictures from like my first and second year. They talk about emotional incest and how that can be equally as damaging. That's when they over-confide in you. They treat you like the spouse that may have abandoned them. And I look a lot like my mother. He was dependent on me so much. I took care of him. I was always trying to make him feel better. He would come to me to vent about his problems, tell me about his day. I'd be there to help him. It doesn't matter if we don't have electricity, who cares? It doesn't matter if we don't have food. I like eating top ramen rods. When I moved to Texas, like I said, I was still trying to reconcile what had happened, whether it had actually happened. And he would write me these letters, and they were just very like, oh, you're the best letter writer in the whole world. It didn't feel like a dad writing to his like a daughter. It felt like somebody yearning. And then when I left for Austin, he fell apart. He crumpled, and he told me over and over again how he felt like he had nothing without me there. Here's where the story kind of comes full circle. I moved to Texas, I start having my flashbacks, but I'm doubting myself, and then I feel guilty as fuck because I think, oh God, am I the person who's making up this story against my dad, who, yeah, maybe a troubled alcoholic drug addict, but certainly not a child molester. And yeah, I felt weird things, but maybe that's all in my head. Okay, he gets a girlfriend who's a year older than me. She had 2 daughters. He was charged with molesting, so that's when I got the confirmation that it wasn't just in my head. You know, the idea of breaking the cycle is really important to me because we're a multi-generational incest family. 3 generations of child abuse. His father molested my aunts and His father molested his aunts. That I don't keep in contact with that side of the family because everyone knows that my grandfather molested my aunts. But up until the day he died, you know, he was revered in the family. He would sit at the head of the table. Even after he died, they would bring out my grandma and my grandpa's things and put them on the table and like memoriam. The hypocrisy of it just didn't sit well with me. I didn't know how we could protect abusers and pretend like nothing had ever happened. And his friends were perverts too. Like my godfather, for instance, I told you that I went to San Francisco with him. Okay, he found me when I was like 20 years old and he told me that he had been in love with me since I was 13 and that he went to a priest and told him, and he's like, well, if she's of age now, I mean, might as well look her up. He's like, I got the consent of a priest. He said it's fine. I didn't confront him about it. I just dropped off. But he would call. He would keep calling. The first time I screamed at him, you know, loud enough for the entire neighborhood. I know what the fuck you did to me. Leave me the fuck alone, right? Last I heard, he was in a halfway home. He had attempted suicide. He hadn't paid rent and they knocked on his door. He answered, but then he darted to the back of the room and he slashed his wrists. The lights were out. I think it was for show. I think it was like a desperate, like, I'm the victim, give me help. I saw him in person when my son was about 2 years old. I was going through a really, really hard time with my own drinking. I've struggled a lot with my alcoholism, like so much. And that's one of the things that I think has been like the hardest for me to forgive him for is because it's been hard. It's been really, really hard to quit. I've wanted to for over a decade. And so things were really bad for me, and he called the house. This was before I had found out about the girls. I talked to him. I talked to him about my drinking. I told him, if anyone's gonna understand the drinking problem, it's you. So I met up with him. His house was pretty empty, pretty bare bones. Booze in the freezer, no food. And he proceeded to try and get me really fucking drunk. He served me a big fucking glass of vodka with like barely any soda water in it. Immediately I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to get me wasted. So I called my ex-husband of all people. Like I hadn't talked to him in forever, but I asked him to come pick me up. And I was drunk from age 12 until 27. From 12 to 27, I was just a fucking raging alcoholic. And you know, I was in gifted and talented programs, and I really loved school and I loved learning, but I dropped out in the 9th grade. And I was really fucked up on drugs for a long time. So yeah, I felt like he stole my childhood, and I felt like he definitely stole my innocence. My ex-boyfriend used to say that I had something of Stockholm syndrome. And it's a difficult thing to deal with because you realize that people are a lot more nuanced than just monsters. And I think that what hurts most is not when I remember him abusing me or the things that I was exposed to that I shouldn't have been exposed to. I think the most painful things are the sweet things, and trying to reconcile the very potent reality of some of my more innocent or benign childhood memories with some of the most like terrible. To think that that could be the same person.